Greetings again, this time from the high Uinta Mountains, and I'm at a campground, and it is raining some, and so if you hear that, that's what it is. This will be backpack number 2 from June 27th to the 30th in 2013. I'm Cordell Andersen, your narrator, and I'm entitling this Chasing the Tie Hacks in the Mysterious Middle Fork of Bikes Fork and a hike up to Alpine Bob's Lake. We begin at Jordanelle Reservoir and we go to Camas and then get on the Mirror Lake Scenic Byway, and along the way we towards the high country. We stop at and see the Provo River on May 26th, and then today on June 26th, a month later. The same at Bald Mountain Pass. We see it on May 26th, and then a month later. You can see the difference. And then the entrance to the Highline Trail, the same thing. And we enter in and see that there is a wide variety of visitors from enjoying our beautiful high Uinta wilderness from all over the West. And then we take a glance at the register. You can hit the pause and see if you recognize some names there. And then on the second page, you can see the first person to go into the along the Highline Trail this year. Then we head north, go down towards Wyoming, and a few miles short of the border, you come to the North Slope Road and turn east towards Black's Fork. You go 20 miles and you cross the West Fork of Black's Fork, and 150 yards south on the road that goes to the East Fork of Black's Fork, you come to a gate. And you go through there, and you can see it's very, very dry this year. But we go through the gate, and we take a turn up that grade to the right. And after a mile or so, it gets just a little bit too rough for my car, and especially pulling in a trailer. And so I park the trailer, and then I drive up a little bit further in the car, and then I start hiking about an hour or so more on the road. When I come to we come to the barrier, where there's a bunch of rolls of wire fencing, and I'll explain what that's all about in just a minute. From there, we go on up through lodgepole forests, and then soon come out into the meadow area. Seen in the distance, beautiful Tocoana Peak, one of the 5 named 13,000-foot peaks in Utah, is 13,165 feet high. And then, but in this meadow area, here I'm showing a picture of the area in 2007 when there was a fence winding its way up through the meadow. And I wondered at the time, well, this was probably from early 19th century, perhaps, when they were doing ranching up there, grazing of livestock or whatnot. But I found from Bernard Acey, the Forest Service Trail and Wilderness Manager, that this was done in 1980 because of some environmentalists who thought that the sheep grazing in the area were hurting the banks of the stream, and so this fence was put up there. But of course, he explained that it didn't do any good, and so it has now been taken down. And I'll mention how that's happened. Of course, I didn't know that as I was taking these pictures on the 27th of June. I looked for nails, and sure enough, I found round nails, which meant that it was from the 910 on period, when 910 or when round nails were invented. Square nails were from the previous century, and we will look for these square nails as we deal here with searching for sites and ruins of the tie hackers. Now, let me explain very quickly. In 1867, the Transcontinental Railroad was being constructed by hand across the Wyoming. They needed millions of railroad ties, and so Irish numbermen were sent into the North Slope of the Uinta Mountains with their broad axes to work 12 months a year, making millions of railroad ties. They would do much of their work in the wintertime when they could transport them over the snow with sleds, and they would accumulate them in the riverbeds behind what they called splash dams, which were temporary structures. And when the runoff would come in the spring and it would fill up with all these ties floating out, they would blow it with dynamite, and they would get washed downstream into Wyoming, where they'd be picked up by the railroad. And here on the West Fork of Smith's Fork, you see the remnants of one of these splash dams. And I was looking for this here. I wanted to see if they didn't do the same thing in this area to get the railroad ties downstream. And in the Narrows, at the north end of all this meadowland, I couldn't see any signs whatsoever of a splash dam having been built there. And so they probably just moved them all out of there, maybe by sleds in the wintertime. Nearby on an Abbey Hill, I noticed a cross, and so I climbed up there, and it was a cross with an obituary to Solomon Sam Gallegos. Apparently his family had put it up there. Whether the ashes are there or I'm not sure, except there his obituary is. You can hit the pause and read it if you like. He loved the outdoors, and at the very end of the obituary, they say, "Don't spend money on flowers. Spend it on taking your family camping." Apparently, he loved the mountains, loved camping, and that's what he wanted people to do. So Sam becomes one of my newest high Uinta friends. So there is a tribute to Sam. Now back to the fence. A couple years ago, a group of explorers and scouts from an LDS ward in the Ogden area formed a group they called Camp Helaman, and they wanted a service project. And so Bernard gave them the task of taking apart this fence. And so there was 125 of them, adults and boys, and they took it apart and carried the wire down to the trailhead. So that's what that's all about. Now we're going up through the meadow, seeing beautiful flowers, and I will not make any attempt to identify anything, but we're heading forward towards Tocoana Peak. And along the trail, of course, we do see a lot of dandelions. It's the most common flower, I guess, and there's some very big ones up in that area, plus, of course, all these other beautiful flowers. I get out of the meadow area and start going up through the forest again, and these are mostly large lodgepole forests, which was the target tree of the tie hackers, and I start seeing stumps. And these are stumps probably from the 1912 to 1935 period, when the tie hackers were working in this area. And so I had an eye out for a cabin, and I actually started crisscrossing back and forth, not just staying on the trail. And all of a sudden, I come up with site number one. This cabin, it was fairly small. It didn't have any windows. It did have round nails, and so it was from the 1912 to 1935 period. When I came back down, I noticed that it also had a fireplace and a low cut there. And that's usually a characteristic of the earlier period, 1867 to 1880. But of course the later period had some of the same characteristics. But there were a lot of stumps in all of that area. And there probably were more cabins, but I just couldn't find any of them because there was a long stretch there, as you'll see on my map at the end of the ruins part of this program, that there was a long stretch there where there were no cabins. In other words, from site number one up to site number two, it was quite a ways. But these tie hackers worked very hard. They had a real tough life, working 12 months a year. temperature, 30, 40 below zero temperature, and they would go out and work no matter what the weather was. And they would have to dig down to actually get at the stumps. And so some of them had a real tough time. When they got old, they couldn't do anything else, and if they didn't have family to take care of them, some of them got pretty depressed. And there's a spot called Suicide Park where 3 of them are buried. And I'll just show you one tombstone here of Ole Olsen, a Swede. Let me just make it clear that this Suicide Park is not in the Middle Fork of Black's Fork, but is actually over in the area of Steel Creek. And you'll hear just in a moment that I think this was actually a Swedish community up the Middle Fork of Black's Fork, which what would have been from the later period, 1912 to 1935, because the earlier period they were mostly Irishmen. But without these guys, these tough guys, there would not have been a transcontinental railroad. They produced the millions of railroad ties necessary, so they are the unsung heroes that we should give a lot of credit for, or a lot of good credit to. For our railroad and for the opening up of the West. Up the trail, I noticed there were many fresh elk tracks, so there was a very healthy herd of elk up in the Middle Fork of the Black's Fork. And of course, as you go along, I of course try and notice everything. Notice these beautiful lichens on this rock right in the middle of the stream, and then wild strawberry plants, and then you come to an area where there's a big swath of a layer, a rough layer coming down off the mountain from the east, and comes down across with big boulders and very rocky trail. And it's in this area where I saw a couple of new varieties of flowers, this red one, and then right nearby a white one that's very similar to it. Of course, there's also red clover as well as white clover. And as I was resting and looking up, I noticed beautiful pine cones forming in the trees there. So look up also, look down, look up, look right look to the left. Yeah, be aware of what you're going through. You see a lot of beautiful things as you travel up through the drainage like this. And then I came to the stream where I had to ford for the first time, well, first and only time. And so I had my slippers. I knew I was going to have to ford it, and so I was ready. And you want to use a stout pole to steady yourself as you go across the stream like this. And just on the other side, I found site number 2. An 18 by 18 foot cabin with no windows. It did have round nails, and right behind it another cabin, 15 by 18, of course also with round nails and a smooth interior, which also is a characteristic of the later period. There's an old rusted stovepipe, and then I found the bottom of a bottle that, if you look closely, you can see 1922 on there. But here you see a broad axe that they used to make the railroad ties. And they could make from 20 to 40 up to 45 in a day, depending on the skill of the worker. Others tried it and could only make 2 or 3 or 6, and they didn't last very long because they got paid in accordance with how many they made. Then I came to site number 3, a cabin up on a hill, 12 by 15. It had a window, and of course you can see here the inside of it, and had very unique cornering, and it was actually held together with nails, round nails. And so it's from the newer period. A little bit up the trail, you take off and go over to the stream, and I found here on one of my earlier trips piles of logs that apparently were ready. They were ready to send downstream, but they never did, and they're just rotting away there. As I'm not sure exactly what that is. A little bit further on, I started noticing some stumps that were just totally rotted away, and so I knew this must have been from the earlier period, and so I kept my eye out, and pretty soon I came to site number 4, which consisted of 2 cabins, quite small, 12 by 12, this first one, no windows, signs of a fireplace inside. I couldn't see nails of any kind in that, but in the one that was nearby, I did find a square nail, as you see here. And so this is the only site that I found in the whole area from the early period, 1867 to 1880. Of course, many of the ruins from that early period have just totally rotted away. Well, up the trail, and here you see a Google Earth view that shows a ruin. I don't show a Google Earth view of all of the cabins or of all of the ruins because some of them were in deep forest and you cannot see any ruins. But here you can, and here you see a big tree falling down right across one of them. There were tin cans, which probably from the later period. There were also round nails. And then I came to the cross trail, where the trail comes in from the west. It's called the Bear River Trail, and then it continues. So here you see it going, coming in from the west, and then you see it here going down towards the stream and towards the east, and that goes on to Smith's Fork. Some people call this trail along the North Slope Highline Trail. My way, going south, you can see there's a ruin in view. So this is site number 6, and it's a fairly small cabin with no windows. It does have a fireplace, but it has round nails. And then a little bit up the trail, site number 7, with a very, very low door. It's only 5 feet high. It does have a window, and it has round nails. And it's near here where I saw signs of coyote, and I'll mention that in just a minute. Then here you see Google Earth again, site number 8, which is a fairly large cabin that once again destroyed by a fallen tree, and back in those days, they did not have the Forest Service signs up warning people of such calamities, and so, but you do see these signs now throughout the forest. You wonder, were there people inside when those trees came down? How many people lost their lives? But then out of this one, of course, you do see a tree growing right up out of it too. And this one here has a 5.5 foot high door, round nails. Then we come to one view that shows 4 different ruins, sites number 9, 10, 11, and 12. The first one is the largest I have ever seen, which is 36 by 18 feet. It does have a few windows, has a wide front door, and if you look closely down underneath all the debris, you can see there's rocks down there and boards that or split logs that make it look like it had a wood floor, and it's the only one that I've found so far that looks like it had a wood floor. This was probably their dining hall. We're seeing here a Swedish community actually, and this is probably their dining hall that they also used on sometimes on weekends for dances and other meetings. And then nearby, there's we approach another one, which I called site number 10, which is also quite large, 30 by 18, and it does have 2 doors, one on the east and one on the north. No windows though. And on one of the logs that is falling down from a wall, there's a tube there, and I'm not sure what that is, but it has round nails. And then to the northeast of it, very close, there is a cabin with small windows, like for ventilation, low down. The front you can't see, it's destroyed, and on the back parts there's a lot of rocks. Then there's a small, there's a low opening, and there's another small structure that was added onto it. This, I conclude, was probably one of their sweat houses, which was a tradition of the Swedes. They would go in there and sweat like crazy, and then they would go out and roll around in the snow. I had round nails, of course, and in front of it, to the south, there was another one very similar to it, similar characteristics, and so there were 2 sweat houses, I conclude. So here we see on the west side, and then on the south side, and then on the north side, and once again the view from Google Earth, and then the river down to the east. So here the Swedes were working away, and here's a Forest Service sign that's kind of being swallowed up by a tree, and I set up my camp here. This is my first camp, and you can see I had a water bucket out there, and I did take my food and dutifully hung it in a tree in case there were bears in the area. But as you see the water bucket there, it had a little water in it, and during the night I heard something out there trying to get up my water bucket, and I looked out, and there was a good moon, and it was a coyote. And so I did have my 45, and I could have fired away, but I didn't want to make a hole in my mosquito netting, and so I just said, "Get out of here!" And he left and never came back. So there was an experience with one of the wild critters. Next day, a little bit up the trail, I came to site number 13, a complex of two. There was a small 10 by 10 foot cabin on the one side, and then a little hallway in between, and then in a fairly large 18 by 20 foot joined to it with two windows and round nails. And here you see the Google Earth view of it, and nearby there's another fairly large cabin. It had a large door, no windows, had round nails, and out to one side it had the chassis of a wagon. Not a real heavy-duty wagon, probably just a small one that they used to bring in supplies. But here you see the views on my topographical map of the sites that the 14 sites that I was able to find and identify, and it undoubtedly was a Swedish, I would say Swedish. It could have been a Finnish community, because there were Finns up there too, and there were a few Danes. From there, there was trails kind of going up along a creek, and so I took quite a long hike following this up to see if there were some more sites, but I didn't find any at all, and so I'm back to where supposedly the trail went. Sometimes it was very, very hard to see, and you'd lose it and have to go along where you'd think the trail should have been, and sometimes you'd find a blaze again, and you'd find the trail again, but just keep going up the creek. There's a area there where it's a little bit rough, and then you come out into where it opens up and some beautiful meadows, and of course you're always enjoying all the beauties around, and then you come to where a stream comes in from the east, and there's a couple of small lakes up there that I've still got to go explore one of these days. The one to the right is the one I followed, and that takes you on up to Bob's Lake through some beautiful forested areas. And then as you get closer, you see that there's going to be, there is quite a bit of snow. I see 3 or 4 different varieties of alpine buttercup here, but I get across the stream and see a flower there that I've seen before up there, never been able to identify yet. It is not heartleaf arnica. It's different. The leaf is different. But I got up there and wondered whether Bob's Lake was going to be frozen over or not. And so I set up my little camp, and then I took off to see whether it was frozen or not, and it wasn't. And so the next day I did try fishing in this beautiful little alpine lake, 11,000 feet in elevation, a little bit above 11,000, which is timberline in the Uintas, and I did catch small tiger trout, which is what I caught years ago. They were bigger years ago, and they grew up and got quite a bit bigger probably, and old and died. And these fish here were probably planted by the Fish and Game last year, or the Department of Wildlife Resources last year. Give them another year, and there'll be some really good fishing up there. I tried the fishing, and I wanted a little shade. There were a lot of flies, and so I wanted to get down where I could at least I'd go in the tent, and it was too hot in there, and I wanted to get down where I could have my tent and some shade. And so I moved down the slope about a mile, and camped in a very beautiful forested area. Had a great relaxation there, and then headed down the trail the next day. Hydrated myself, of course, along the way, and doing just great, and having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden, I was overtaken by a couple. It was Mike and Nicole Monroe. They had been up to Bob's Lake too. Apparently, they got there just after I had left to move down a little ways for with my camp. But they also caught some of the small tiger trout. She's from Germany. They met in Switzerland, and so that's a beautiful couple. More Hyena wilderness friends. I do have to show you a picture of this flower here. It's called scorpion weed. Usually it's very dull, but I found some up there that was just brilliant, as you see here in color. So we're back down to the meadow area, and there's some fishermen on the stream there casting, and I look back at Tocowanna Peak, and pretty soon I'm down to the car and on to Mountain View, Wyoming, and then I drove on to Uri, which is nearby in a parking lot there where commuters park, and I to camp out and to relax, get some food, and get a bath. But I took the memory card out of my camera and set it on the bed alongside me, and then I was setting up the computer to be able to download the photographs, 363 of them, and the memory card then was gone. And for the next 3 or 4 hours, I about went crazy, very methodically going through everything, searching and researching, and I could not find my memory card. I prayed, of course, like crazy. And I thought, well, maybe it went down a crevice or a crack in my camper, and I got my flashlight out, and I thought I could see it, and I got my tools out, started taking my camper apart, and to find that it wasn't it after all. And so I finally went to bed at 2:30 in the morning, not able to find it, and thinking, I guess I'm going to have to do it again, go up and do the whole trip all over again. So the next morning I was down at Mountain View at a rest area, and I was getting all my equipment aired out, and took some dishes in the restroom to wash, and washed a couple of things, and then I bent over to pick up something else, and then I heard something drop on the cover to my pot that was down on the floor, and it was my memory card. It just came from nowhere, like manna from heaven. And you can't imagine how grateful I felt. And so I had my memory card. I wasn't going to have to make the trip all over again. And so I very grateful, prepared to go on with go forward with my research about these tie hackers. Just remember, they're the unsung heroes of our American West, without which the West would have not been won, because they are the ones that made all these railroad ties that and made the railroad possible. You can see some of the ties on the railroad today. They look like they're probably from the tie hackers still, but we should always remember. And I went on to over near the Mirror Lake highway to camp out eventually, and that's where I'm actually making this video, and I'm actually camping in the track of the Hilliard flume, but and making this video with inside my little cabin camper, but I did a lot of research, made a lot of new friends in Lyman, in Mountain View, in Fort Bridger, in Evanston, and so here you see some of them. There's Kendra Cagle at the Bear River State Park Information Center. That is a great place to go visit, by the way. And then at the Forest Service Ranger Station in Evanston, there's Ambera Kirkland, who I met a number of years ago, back in 2008. Here she is in 2008, and then up at the Bear River Ranger Station, I met Rebecca, or Becca as she calls herself, Laird, an incredible young lady who rebuilt this 1993 Dodge Cummins diesel motored pickup truck, and this is a real cowboy vehicle, and so she rebuilt this herself. And so she's working there at the Bear River Ranger Station. And then I finally, at the Evanston Ranger Station, met Bernard Acey, the Trails and Wilderness Manager, and had, an hour or two of conversation with him of all kinds of subjects, and learned all kinds of things. And then with Becca's recommendation, I went to the museum in Evanston, and I met Kay, the director, and she gave me 2 CDs with all kinds of information burned on about the tie hackers. And in the conversation, she realized that there was a Utah that knew something about the tie hackers, and so she has invited me to speak on August 1st to their historical society at the Evanston Museum. And so I'll be back to Evanston. Excited about meeting with a big group of people who are knowledgeable and will help me understand more of this great history, without which the West wouldn't have been won. And then from there, I went on to Colville, Utah, which is the county seat of Summit County, where Middle Fork is, because Middle Fork is never mentioned anywhere in any of the reports, any of the writings. And I just wanted to find something, and so I went to Colville, and I talked to Navi Vernon. She's the historical director in the county offices there, and she gave me information too, and then told me, hey, you got to see the museum. I went down and went through the museum that she had put together. It's just incredible. Everybody should go see it. And so she's another of my High Uinta friends. And then I came back to REI in Salt Lake City. I had to get a map, and there I met Wayne and Susie Gregory. They were attracted to my little cabin camper, and he is the inventor of the Gregory packs. And so we had this great conversation, and so there are another couple of High Uinta Wilderness friends, and so that's the trip. It was an incredible second backpack and period of doing research and investigation in all of these various places and meeting all these wonderful people. So I will be with you next time soon.